Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl, and today I'm talking about the books I read in March. As you can see from this pile over my shoulder, I read a lot of books in March. This was actually the best middle grade March I've had in a few years. The first book I picked up for middle grade March was Myrtle Means an Opportunity by Elizabeth C. Bunce. I've talked on here before about how much I really enjoy the Myrtle books. This is the fifth book in the series, and it didn't disappoint. I really enjoyed it. I don't want to talk about too much of the plot, as that could spoil for other books, but in this, Myrtle joins her governess in Scotland, and so they are trying to see if there is a death that is a murder or not, and solve mysteries while they're on this little island in Scotland. As far as predictability, with the other Myrtle books, I've usually had a pretty good idea of who the villain was, and in this one I knew almost from the beginning the whole story. I still enjoyed watching it unfold, but it definitely was, I feel like, a little bit more predictable even than the other ones. Next, I read Framed by James Ponti. This book is about a young boy named Florian Bates who has kind of created this thing he calls TOAST, which stands for the theory of all the small things. He's a lot like a little Sherlock. He just notices the little things everywhere he goes, and so he's able to figure out things about people that other people don't necessarily notice. So he ends up being contacted by some people in the FBI to help them. This is one of those books that when you're reading it as an adult, you definitely have the thought come into your mind of how unbelievable the story is. But if you're able to just suspend disbelief about it, you'll have a good time. This was the first book I've read by James Ponti, and I enjoyed it so much. It's not a really small book, and I read it within about a day and a half. I could have read it faster had I not had school to do with my kids that day. I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was so much fun. I know that this book is one that I would have absolutely adored when I was a kid. My 18-year-old daughter, she tends to have a lot of the same book opinions as I do, and she read this right after me, and she moved on to the second book before I could because she really enjoyed it as well. Right after that, I went immediately into Spies, also by James Ponti, and this book also has a pretty unbelievable premise. It's children, they're teenagers, that are a part of an MI6 group. So they're all spies at this young age. But again, if you can just get it out of your mind that it's unbelievable, it is so much fun. Abigail, my daughter, that has the same interest as me, she and I both really love spy stories. We love spies, we love secret agents, coding. Our favorite show to watch as a family is Mission Impossible, the old TV shows. I knew immediately that she would love this book. I liked the kids. I felt like the story was really solid for a kid's spy story. I told my husband partway through that this felt like a Michael Crichton book for kids, and I just really enjoy his writing. Also, a bonus is one of the characters in it named Kat. She reminds me a lot of my 18-year-old of Abby. They are so much alike. And so that was kind of fun to see that. And then it was, I think, fun for her to see that as well. I forgot to mention which prompts for middle grade March I was reading these books for. So I will actually go through that again at the end. But one that I will mention right now is When Stars Are Scattered. I had talked about on my middle grade March TBR that I was going to be reading The City of Ember for the refugee story because I didn't have any middle grade refugee stories. But then my husband and I went to a store called Second and Charles, and I saw this graphic novel. This was co-written by Victoria Jamieson and Omar Mohammed. And Omar and his brother were in a refugee camp in Kenya. Omar's brother is nonverbal, and so Omar, and they've lost, their dad died, and they don't know where their mom is. And so Omar has taken a caretaker role. I thought that the art was good in this. It was definitely engaging, and I enjoyed the story a lot. I felt like it was very impactful, and I actually assigned this to my 14-year-old daughter, Madeline, right after I read it for her school reading. So I'll talk about that in another video for school stuff. Really loved this book, and I was so glad I picked it up. Then, as a family, we've been reading How to Study the Bible by John MacArthur. It's just a teeny little book, and we would just read a chapter out of this every Sunday, and we finished this up. I really liked it. It wasn't my absolute favorite book by John MacArthur, but I did feel like it gave us some really good conversation starters and tips. Then I read The Mona Lisa Vanishes by Nicholas Day, and this was the group pick for middle grade March. I really enjoyed this. It's a nonfiction about when the Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre, and how that is basically why it's as famous as it is. Throughout the book, there's little drawings here and there that are that I thought were really fun to look at. And I enjoyed that. I always really like illustrations in books. And one of the things I really liked about it is that it gave a ton of history about the Mona Lisa. It talked about Leonardo da Vinci, the woman that sat for the painting. It talked about different other painters and artists at the time, the police inspectors. And I found that so interesting that when we start school back up after spring break, I'm going to be using this for a unit study. Then I read The Winter King by Christine Cohen. This book was not bad, but it had a really slow start for me. I had a really hard time becoming invested in the characters and in the storyline. I don't know if I just wasn't in the mood for it. I would have to revisit it another time when I'm more in the mood for fantasy and mythology. I think it just really contrasted with the other middle grade books I was reading as well. And this didn't feel like middle grade to me. This felt like a YA. Also, it had said in the blurb that it was connected to Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. And I didn't understand that actually. When I was reading, I didn't see any connection at all. Maybe if you've read both, you could tell me what I missed. But this was decent, but I didn't love it. After that, I read City Spies #2, Golden Gate, and I had to wait for my daughter to finish reading it, and then I was able to read it. Again, his books are actually pretty big, but they go really fast. And just like the other one, this book was really fun to read, definitely had some unbelievable situations, but I was able to just enjoy it and believe it. And I had a lot of fun reading it. Next, I read The Boy on the Wooden Box by Leon Leeson, and I've had this on my TBR cart for a couple of years. And this tells the story of his family, of Leon's family, and how they ended up in Krakow. And so when the Germans took control, they were put in a ghetto first and then in a concentration camp. And luckily, his family his dad began working for Oskar Schindler. And so they were able to be put on Schindler's List. And so this tells the story of his time through the war, and then afterward it updates a little bit on his life afterward. When I was a teenager, I saw Schindler's List, and I haven't seen it again. I've kind of wanted to, but I know that there's things in it that I don't necessarily want to see. But I became very interested in Schindler after seeing that movie and bought a book called Schindler's Legacy that has stories of a lot of people that were on his list and how he saved their lives. And so I just found this immediately engaging, and it was just another testament of what that man did in risking his life every day to help people and do what was right. I think sometimes it's hard to put ourselves in that position of how dangerous it was to be a Nazi in his position and to be doing what he did. And then also it just like most of the books that are in a Jewish perspective on World War II from people that are in concentration camps, it just reminds you of how horrible the things are that they went through. And especially from a child. I mean, he was an adult, obviously, when he wrote this, but seeing the perspective of what he went through as a child, it was very moving. It definitely made me tear up a few times and had me thinking about it when I wasn't reading it. And I feel like it was a very important book, and I will be reading this with my daughters. After that, I read Vanished. So this was the sequel to Framed from James Ponti. And in this one, the boy Florian Bates and his friend from the first book are solving another mystery. And again, very fun story. I didn't figure out everything in it. I think it was a little bit less enjoyable at first than it would have been if I hadn't read it right after such a serious book. But after a little while, I was able to get into it again and really enjoy it. The weirdest thing was that on the day that the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed, I was reading this book and they were at the Francis Scott Key Bridge. It's a solid middle grade mystery. Then I read a short biography of E.B. White called Some Writer by Melissa Sweet, and I don't actually have it anymore. I thought it was okay. I felt like it was very disjointed. It felt like it kind of jumped around a lot. It was made to look like a scrapbook, so it was kind of cool to look at, but I just felt jumpy to me. And then there were a few things in it that I felt like, since it was written for children, could have been left out. And I decided that it wasn't really something I cared enough about. I do love his books, especially Trumpet of the Swan, but I just decided I didn't really care about keeping the biography. Next, I read City of Ember by Jean Deprow, and I'd already read the other refugee story, but I wanted to read this still anyway. They do call it a refuge city, so it really would have counted. This city was put together by the builders and a long time before this, and there's this little box with instructions that is supposed to open at a certain time, and it did, but nobody noticed and nobody knew what was in it. And so they don't know how to leave this underground city or that there even is anything to go to from this city. but the city is starting to have some problems. And I thought this was a really fun book. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. It feels kind of like middle grade dystopian. I don't think I'm going to be continuing with the series though. When I looked them up on Goodreads, it seemed like the second and third book had very mixed reviews. And then it seemed like people liked the fourth one, but I just don't feel like slogging through 2 books to get to the fourth when this one pretty much gave me the information I wanted to know for the story. So if you've read the rest of the series and think I should read them, let me know. On the day that I finished that book, I took everything off my schedule that day and I declared a day off, and I decided I wanted to try to get through as many of the small middle grade books on my cart that I could. And so I finished that one, and then I read 5 Children and It by E. Nesbit, but I'm going to get to that in just a minute. After that, I read The 21 Balloons. Again, I'm going to butcher this name, William Penny Dubois. And in this story, it is a man who is trying to go around the world in a hot air balloon, and he ends up on an island that has a lot of diamonds. This was creative and fun, and I did enjoy it. It wasn't groundbreaking for me, but I did enjoy it, and I think a lot of kids would have fun with this book. After that, I read Chitty, Chitty, Bang, Bang by Ian Fleming. I've been wanting to read a book by him for a very long time. I am interested in reading the Bond books, but I loved the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang movie as a child, so I decided I wanted to read this first. It was so different than the movie, but I enjoyed it. It's a silly story and just a lot of fun, and it was very short, so I was able to read it very quickly. And afterward, I just thought, I can't even say which I like better, the movie or the book. I think I might even like the book better, but there's a few things in the movie that I really loved, so I'll continue to like both. After that, I read this very small little book as a pre-read for my youngest daughter, Hachiko Waits, and it is about a dog in Japan whose owner went on this train and never came back. And so the dog went to the train station and waited every day until the dog died. And apparently they have a statue there at the train station for this dog. And apparently it's become kind of a national treasure. As I was reading it, I thought the whole book was fact. And then at the end, I found out that the storyline they were giving was fiction. And then Leslie Newman said which parts were actually true. I do wish that I'd known going into it that it wasn't all fact. It was a good book. Then I read another one that I was reading for her, and this is very short. Paddle to the Sea. I read this in under an hour. I enjoyed this. I think it's a fun little story for kids. I do think it's a little bit young for what I was looking at. A Native American boy, or he might have been in Canada. I can't remember if he was in Canada or in America. But either way, he carved a little boat. We put it on the snow to make it go down into the water, and he had on the bottom to leave it in the water or put it back in the water. So when people would find it, they would either add to it or write the location on it, put it back in the water. And eventually it was very worn, and so somebody kind of repainted it and things like that. So it is about this little wooden carving of a Native American in a canoe getting all the way from up by the Great Lakes to the ocean. All month I was listening to Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. This was a buddy read with my mom for our Inklings group. And this book was about this woman that would run the orphan home, having people spend a ton of money to adopt these children. So it was basically child trafficking. And so the story is told in 2 time periods, from a girl that family is connected somehow, and then a girl that it's happening to. It was a very sad book. There were parts that were hard to listen to. Overall, it was a good book and definitely gets you thinking, and there's a lot to dig into with it, but it was very sad. And the last book I finished in March was City Spies number 3, The Forbidden City, again by James Ponti. And again, I loved it. I'm really enjoying the series. I probably won't be reading any middle grade books in April, and so probably in May I'll get to book 4. I really want to wait until book 5 is in paperback before I buy it so that it will match. It'll be the same size and everything, but I don't know. We might end up having to get it before then. But again, solid story, a lot of fun. If you don't like middle grade, you don't like spy stories, you don't like kids as spies, you have to read something that's only believable, you probably wouldn't like these books. But if you enjoy just a really fun middle grade spy romp, you'll probably really like these books. Middle Grade March apparently could have been sponsored by James Ponti. I only had 2 DNFs this month. The first one was 5 Children and It by E. Nesbit. That's why I said I would come back to it. It wasn't that this was a terrible book or that I hated it. In fact, I probably won't get rid of it. I just will probably come back to it another time. After reading so many really fun books this month, when I started reading this, I just couldn't get into it. And so again, I don't know if it was the writing or if it was just the mood I was in. I'm not sure, but I just didn't want to spend any time on it since I couldn't get right into it. The other one I didn't finish was the Essay of Dramatic Poe by John Dryden. This was a book I was reading for my British literature course. When I started reading it, I bought this copy on Amazon. I didn't look at it right when I got it, but when I started flipping through it, I found that basically it looks like somebody took somebody's school copy and just copied it on a copy machine or scanned it into their computer with all of their notes. The notes weren't even legible. And so I couldn't really gain anything from whatever this person was writing because of that. But also, some of the scans were not clear. I don't know if you can see this. It's blurry. And so that would happen every few pages, and I wouldn't know anything that it was saying, or I'd have to sit and struggle to read it. There were times when there was black marker over words, and I just got tired of trying to read it. I could not even tell you what this was about. I did not get far enough into it to understand what I was reading or to have it make any impact on me at all. So for the middle grade March prompts, the one-word title was Framed. The debut novel was The Winter King. The refugee story was When Stars Are Scattered. For animal on the cover, I used Myrtle Means an Opportunity because there's little hunting dogs. A book I felt like I missed out on, I'd used City Spies because I knew it had been around for a while and I hadn't read it yet. And then of course the group read all the Mona Lisa Vanishes. For my other monthly challenges, for the Read Your Bookshelf Challenge, for my mod side, because as you guys remember, I'm trying to do both sides every month. For the mod side, it was a Kindred Spirits, a book that has 2 points of view. So for that, I used Before We Were Yours because of the girl in the past and the girl in the present. And for the Doyle side, it was Baker Street Irregulars, more than 2 points of view. And for this, I also used City Spies because it did jump around in the book sometimes to different kids and different people telling what was happening where they were at. I didn't read any new Sherlock books this month, unfortunately, but hopefully I will be getting to the next one in April. For the Read Around the World-a-thon, March was a character you would bring on a trip, and I used Myrtle from Myrtle Means an Opportunity. She was on a trip, and I would take any of these books on a trip if I was reading them. I also had used this for Buzzword-a-thon because it was a book with a character name on it. One last book I was going to mention is I've been keeping you updated on the books that I had assigned to my husband, and in February, I said that he had finally finished Treasure Island, and he liked it. He didn't love it, but that he had started another book and was having a hard time putting it down. It actually only ended up taking him about 3 or 4 days to finish this, so much faster than Treasure Island, but he finished it in March, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. He had no idea what this was about before he went into it, and I think most people know this is kind of a look at communism. Yeah, he had such a hard time putting it down. He was thinking about it all the time. He had dreams about it afterward. So this was definitely a hit. Let me know if you have read any of these books. If you read anything for middle grade March, what was your favorite book in March?